This is Kyle Mills, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
So I was when I booked you earlier because you had the new book coming out. I had lost track that you'd been on the show about a year ago. It turns out you the day you and I did our show, the next day my brother passed away. So that whole hunk of
Oh,
time became a whole different reality. And I was like, wait a second, I think Kyle's been on the show before. But you know how I don't know if you hadn't lost anybody from your immediate family, but everything that was important is immediately thrown off the deck of the ship, and you're just trying to get the ship to
yeah.
stay above water.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so, just the crazy thing is, as you know, look, we're basically the same age. As we get in this age of our life where people we know can just simply drop dead because they start to naturally die or whatever it is, we we have to deal with these things in life, and we all have real jobs. Like I've still got to go out and produce shows. You've still got to write pages for books.
Yeah. It is kind of a strange time in life. I've had a couple of periods when I'm live in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and I was a big backcountry skier and climber, and I had this period of my youth where all my friends were dying in accidents.
Right.
And then we all got too old to do that crap, and now it's like the real deal. You get old and you start thinking, shoot, I better not, lift that thing up. I might keel over.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. We didn't
Yeah.
come to talk about how old and closer towards the end we are. We came to talk about your new book, Oath of Loyalty, which is, I mean, it's incredible this life you built. One of the things we talked about last show was just, what do you call yourself when you go to a party? And you're like, I'm a writer, and that usually shuts them up. But we talked about like, what does it mean to be a writer? Are you a technical writer? Are you a show? Do you write shows, screenplays, audio plays, playwright, whatever it is, right? You can be all of these things. Do you think that you have found your thing ultimately, or is there something else that you'd like to get into someday?
From a writing standpoint,
Sure.
yeah, one day I'd like to do maybe my couple of books on my own. I wrote a lot. I can't even not even know how many, maybe 14 or something, probably,
Yeah.
before I went to work for Robert Ludlum and then took over the Vince Flynn series. So I've got some ideas banging around in my head that, wouldn't work necessarily in the series I've written for other people, because, you have to be, when you do what I do, which I guess now they call a legacy writer, you have to be really conscious of not writing your own book and, sticking somebody else's characters in it, because it doesn't work. So I'm always, when I write these books, very much thinking about, what would Vince do, if he was writing this book, and would he, agree with all the decisions I made.
You're talking about Vince Flynn, who originated the series, and now you write the Mitch Rapp character thing. Does this put you back into the canon that predates you, so that you kind of keep in mind, or is that just already in your head, or how do you manage that, staying within Vince's voice?
It becomes increasingly hard. It's funny that the first book I did, I thought would be the hardest to remain in his voice, but I had done a huge amount of research, and I read the entire series in one big push and really, thought about every word I wrote, because I was taking over the series. I wanted it to be really seamless and nobody would ever, be able to tell, essentially. But now you get farther from Vince's death, it's interesting how much the world has changed. I don't think I ever really thought about that as much as I do now, because to me, there's like, BV and AV, before Vince and after Vince. And that's the way I kind of see the world, is he was writing about certain things that were very much happening in the world. He was a writer who kind of did the rip from the headlines stuff, that feel, it's a little cliched, but that's what he did. And then after that, I think of that as sort of my starting block. And I look back on it and I think, wow, Vince suddenly reappear today, I don't think he'd recognize the environment he would have to write in.
Yeah. Things have changed a lot since 2013, haven't they?
Yeah, which is crazy because it just wasn't that long ago. I mean, I drive a 2014 Subaru. It's like when I bought my car, and I feel like it's my new car.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a 2014 truck, and I'm like, it's the best vehicle in the world. It's paid for, and it's basically brand new.
Exactly.
I mean, It's got 100,000 miles. That's not like a big deal anymore, though, right?
Yeah.
250,000, 300,000 miles. That's
My
expected.
my town's only like 2 miles across, so mine has like 48,000 miles on it. But yeah,
Yeah,
I think about, geez, the world when I bought that stupid car was really different than the world we live in today.
yeah, yeah. How does Mitch like this world that we're in now?
I think he's struggling with it. Because he was this, you know, he was this guy who he specialized in terrorism, and that's a really, I mean, it's not a pleasant place to be because people are trying to kill you all the time, but it's a pleasant place to be in that I think there's a very clear good guy and a very clear bad guy, right? I mean, the guy trying to, smuggle a nuke into the United States, there's not a lot of ambiguity there. You're trying to protect your country and the people in it. But now it's, it's different. A lot of internal conflict in the United States that was not as strong back then. You've got China and Russia and places like this, and the Islamic terrorism has moved more into the background. And those are big, complex, difficulty for a guy with a Glock to solve problems that, are also sometimes a little ambiguous. It's, what maybe is a problem for me politically might not be a problem for you politically.
I'm always struck by like we used to say when we were kids, not that we had all the answers, but we used to say sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And now there's a semicolon after that, unless you hurt me. It's like words can be so terrible. And then a dude like Mitch, he kind of confounds that whole notion of violence is never the answer, right? And throughout human history, violence absolutely is a means to an end. It may not be the preferred one now as we try to be more civilized, but give us 5 minutes and we'll suck at humanity again, because humans turns out are bad at humanity.
Yeah, but I've always thought that was a funny saying because, it's violence is maybe an undesirable means to an end, but it definitely gets you to the end. If all the people who you see as enemies are dead, you definitely solved your problem. So,
Right.
and it's not coming back. So, it's, but, those kinds of solutions are a little different when instead of, a terrorist cell, you're working with China or Russia, and, and particularly the United States. I mean, if a democracy is a democracy, and sometimes, in this book and the last book, you have a president for the first time that Mitch can't stand. He thinks is, kind of a anti-American in a way, anti-democracy. However, he has to sit there and say, but the people voted him in, and he didn't really even lie about who he was or what he wanted to do. Is that it's not, if I went and killed this guy, because I mean, in this book, Mitch has problems with him that are personal, not political. But if I went in there and said, this is a bad president, the Americans made a mistake and I killed him, well, that's not a democracy. That's a sort of like me becoming the dictator. So, a lot of things for him to work through. And I think maybe he liked it better before.
I'm after you, the next show I'm going to do in about an hour after we're done is a guy named David Pietruzza. I don't know if you know his work. He's an author. He does histories. And I was struck by, the premise of your book, Oath of Loyalty, and what he's writing about with FDR in the election year of 36 and how these things play out, right? And these things, first off, talk about ripped out of the pages of history, like the actual, like the stuff that they were doing in 36 leading up to that election and everything. It's the exact same thing. It's the exact same people saying the exact same stuff about each other. It's just different on the timeline, right? And so all these different things going on. And then, and for those that don't know, we'll have the show in another hour. And I'm not trying to promote David's book here, but I think it's relevant. So Huey Long is assassinated as he's running potentially maybe for president. And it completely changes the outcome of the 36 election because there would have been this contested split thing. And so we have this thing where if you have a very polarized electorate, with a large, and I think we have a very large in the middle folks willing to look, hey, you just want somebody good, not somebody from your party or this party. You can all of a sudden fracture what's normal and have these radicals. I mean radicals in terms of like happenstance, not like I'm an extreme radical.
Right.
But you can have these outcomes that like everybody's like, how'd that happen? Right. But it's because we're so polar right now that this middle part actually has a pretty big say if everybody kind of just throws in the middle.
Yeah, and it's interesting that there are a lot of independents now, but research shows they tend to always go with one party or the other. So while they might say they're independent, to me, that an independent, a true independent, is somebody who's voted for, Republican and Democratic presidents. I think that's becoming rarer now.
Yeah.
And what do people want? It's kind of an interesting question. What's good government? My background, strangely, is in economics, and that's what I studied in school. And I always kind of put a number to good governance, like all economists do, right? I mean, are people healthy? Are they living a long time? Or do they have money? But that may not be fundamentally what people are looking for. I think what we're learning, and I think the failure of economics is to make people seem more rational than they are. That we're all seeking sort of this this greater good that's measurable. I want to be faster, stronger, better looking, richer, whatever. And that's not necessarily true. And I think politicians understand that and learn to pander to it. So, which can be dangerous, historically has been dangerous.
We and I don't want this to be a big old political discussion show, but it's important, I think, to kind of stay in this topic because you do have consequences. Someone like a Mitch Rapp has to go out and solve for this problem that you didn't see, because no politician is running on saying, hey, we need an outside lethal element to go handle these, our champion to go out and stand in front of their champion and see who wins. But I think about we want these better things, right? In my backyard, we've got this big, beautiful pomegranate tree that's about to give us however many pomegranates survived the bird attack. And none of us want to actually pull that harvest in and break the pomegranates open and pull out all the, the arils. I mean, it's just a lot of work. So the juice and the squeeze, we don't even want the squeeze right now. We want the juice, but we don't want to buy it somewhere and just be done with it. And I think it's that's also part of the problem is everybody's promising stuff. And it's like, hey, at some point we can only be so broke as a nation before someone's like, you guys' credit sucks.
Yeah. I mean, again, the complicated stuff that doesn't make for a lot of good thriller stories. Yeah. But yeah, I and it's funny, I live in Spain a lot, and they have even a worse problem there with the one of the big things is the aging population. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. It's funny, America, somebody once described as an elder care company with a military. And it's kind of true if you look at where we spend money on. It's Social Security, Medicare, and the military. Everything else is a little chump changey. But it is going to be interesting to see how the future unfolds with the big changes, which are to some extent the fact that people are living a really long time and not having very many children. Right there you've got a problem that sort of seems insurmountable at this point. And they throw climate change on top of that, and you've got these really big questions about what do you do? What does America do in a shrinking, with a shrinking population? Nobody's ever dealt with that before.
Yeah. It's a crazy thing, right? All these different problems and the economist end of it. We had Bjorn Lomborg on the show a while back, and he approaches with Nobel quality economists, like, how do we deal with climate change? And at first he was a darling of the movement because he was talking about the thing that everybody cared about. And then they realized what he was saying, and they're like, wait a second, we don't like this prescription. Like he was saying, hey, people's access to energy, if they're poor, is the best place to put our money. That's how economists think. Like if you want to, improve these things, you have to solve these other problems. You can't just throw $10 million to get a $5,000 output. I mean, economists hate those solutions.
Yeah.
But boy, yeah.
But where's the money come from? And
Yeah.
all of that. It's an interesting problem, and it was funny because the economic analysis I was looking at, and this isn't true often of economists, was basically like, well, I think we're screwed. They didn't even offer a solution. That's not a good sign.
I had an economist on, and we're going to get right back to the book here in a second. I had an economist friend I was talking to, and I'm like, we want to make these tax laws to impact the people that have the best tax lawyers and have the most money to throw at this resource. Like, are we just chasing our tail? And he's like, yes. Yeah, you're just not good. Like, people who are good at working with money will always work for people who have a lot of money, and they will all figure out how to keep and make more money. Like, there's not an elasticity even, like, it's just, they're different things, and trying to solve for that, boy, it's really tough. Let me ask you about Mitch. I asked you last show if he voted. Now that he's got this president that he's not interested in, is he becoming more political in his thoughts? Or, I mean, how does he justify? You swear an oath, right? And now, even if you don't like the guy, it's why a lot of us military guys don't vote while we're in service. We want to be in the compromised position of picking our boss. But how does he think politically about these things when he comes to realize that, hey, this guy, he may not be the right answer, and I may have to pay attention to this?
It's really hard for him because he has a similar attitude to you that, what he doesn't want to pick his boss. It's and certainly doesn't want to go beyond voting into something more, more action oriented. I think he wants to retreat from it. He's got a house now in South Africa that he spends a lot of time with. His girlfriend is French. It's sort of, and I think maybe it's partially, the author, me, that you want to solve things, you want to solve problems, but the big ones are becoming really big and really complex. Like I was saying with the economist that at the end of his thought said, well, those are the problems. I have no idea how to solve any of them. And so Mitch still wants to focus on, the problems he can solve. And I think that's true of all of us, right? I mean, it's depressing to think, well, I don't know, I have a solution for this. But then when something blows up and you think, well, that I have power over, I can do that. But you don't think, Mitch ever wants to become president or anything and try to, resolve the world's problems that way. I can guarantee you that.
Yeah. When you work in conflict environments, dangerous things like this, you're going to make mistakes because you're focused on action. You're not focused on perfection, and you just can't be. You can be perfectly prepared maybe, but once you get out there, you're going to kill the wrong person on occasion, and you're just going to know, even if you can't account for where that person is, something you did got somebody killed because of your action. How does Mitch deal with things like that?
It's an interesting question because he definitely has made mistakes in the past that have caused the death of people that, innocent people. And I think, in fact, I think I might even have him thinking about this in this book, but the emotion he hates the most is regret, because it's pointless. You learn from the mistake if there was anything to learn, but like you say, sometimes just luck of the draw. There was no way to win. And move on, compartmentalize it. And he's like, someday I'll sit around on my porch when I'm old and regret all day long, but not now.
When you are a champion, for the nation, for the forces of good versus the forces of evil, there's other costs with that. What would you say is Mitch's favorite emotion? If he hates regret, what does he like the most? And is it focused on job and satisfaction, or is it focused on that sweet lady down there in South Africa that he gets to hang out with?
I likes the lady, but I got to think for Mitch, it's victory.
Okay.
It's completing the mission and winning. I mean, you can see that's driven him, from the very first books that, he wants to win. And that's sometimes maybe to a fault, but the truth is those are the kinds of people, you got to take the good with the bad with people who can really get stuff done. And that guy's kind of a rocket powered steamroller. And, unfortunately, if you get in his way, even by accident, you could have some issues.
At some point, if you keep writing under this banner, you will have written more novels than Vince.
Yeah, it's kind of creeping up, isn't it?
Yeah, right. I mean, you've written a lot of them now, right? And he didn't live for a terribly long time to have a big number you couldn't hit, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, thoughts.
I don't know. I honestly have mixed feelings about that. I'm not sure how to think about that. I mean, it's like there's a line in Bull Durham, and somebody says, "Do you realize that you just hit you have the best home run record in the minor leagues?" And he says, that's kind of a dubious honor, isn't it?
Right.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe that. I don't know. But the truth is, though, it's a great series. It's great fun to write. You know, the fans have been great to me. I mean, they love the books. They love the character. You know, I did when I was a fan of Vince's, you know, before I started writing the book. So, you know, maybe that's too strong a statement. You know, it's been a great job. He has a fantastic team around him that now, you know, support me, which is terrific. So,
Yeah.
you know, when you have pretty much the perfect job, it's a little hard to complain.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But things only stay perfect for so long. At some point, there has to be some kind of tension to cause creation. I know you've slowed down Mitch's aging thing. It was like year to year. Every time a book came out, he was that much older.
Yeah.
But do you foresee any kind of problem within the canon of there being like too many things without enough time passing?
Yeah. I mean, that you just can't avoid that.
Right.
You know, so like you were saying, Vince aged him normally. Every year, every book came out, he was 1 year older. And, you know, but Mitch would be 57, 56, 57 now. So, and that's probably what Vince would have done. You know, now maybe he'd be moving more into a kind of a Stan Hurley sort of mentor thing, and there would be young people coming up, and he maybe would have moved up in the CIA or something like that. Whereas I didn't feel free to do that because, you know, it kind of writes an end to the series and I'm sure that Vince would have just ended the series when he decided to retire. So yeah, I mean, it creates crazy timelines. I mean, you think about Jason Bourne fought in Vietnam. You know, if you go back and look, his kids are old. Like, by now his kids are probably in their 60s. So you can't. You have to be a little vague. Like I'm writing a book now that involves Syria, but I have to always be very careful never to, for instance, mention Assad. I can't ever mention Putin or somebody like that. Only people that are dead and have been dead for a long time. Otherwise, you know, you really create dates. Even a lot of, you know, contemporary thriller figures, you know, maybe cut their teeth in Afghanistan and Iraq. And even like if you fought in Iraq, you know, there's a date on that. So I think fans completely ignore it, though. Yeah. So I always thought it was a problem, but it's not a problem.
I did all the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and that means that just about 20 years ago, I started deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan, you know, and I'm in my about to be my mid 30s here. And the last thing I want to do is be running around with 100 pounds on my back. It's like,
well, exactly. You know, it's hard for me to write you as a 25-year-old.
Right.
You know,
right.
Yeah, you sit there and talk about all your experience in Iraq. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's a funny thing. One thing that Tom Clancy did, though, is he introduced these new series that were sort of spin-offs like Rainbow Six and that whole thing where he had these other characters became something else. I mean, and actually, is that your decision or is that the Flynn Estates decision?
That'd be the family's decision to do if they wanted to do something like that.
You don't
certainly.
I mean, like that though.
He did a lot of great characters. So there's a lot you could do there. I think it'd be really fun. I've said before for people who maybe aren't familiar with the character, Stan Hurley was Mitch Rapp's mentor. I killed him off in the first book because he was really old. I mean, he was like in his 80s. And still doing ops. But I think it'd be really interesting to go back to when Stan Hurley first got into, you know, would it have even been the CIA back then? I'm not sure if it was. And started, you know, fighting the Soviets. I love all that stuff, like the microfilm and the hollowed out nickel. And, you know, I mean, that's just the classic era of spy. So, you know,
Yeah.
the spy versus spy. So, you know, they're like, you know, Scott Coleman is another incredible character who's very different than Mitch, who would be really interesting to write about. So there's a ton of stuff in there if anybody ever wanted to do it.
I had Jack Barsky on the show. You know, we were talking about, you know, because I'm counterintelligence and he's a forward collector, right? So my job is to find him. And I was like, one of the things I know about our job is as we go to do it, we're trying not to be detected. You end up spending, I don't know, 90% of your time on not being detected, you know? And so you're trying to, that one moment where you're sending a burst transmission or putting the paper in the rock and putting the rock on the bench, you know, all that stuff. That's like when like all of the evidence is on your person, you know, and you spend a lot of time covering your tracks, maybe driving 3 hours in the wrong direction to go do something and then come back, you know, all of these things. That's not
and not getting caught with it, because then they have it. You know, it's not like an encrypted disk or something like that. So it's funny. I wrote, and I guess it was the last book, that Mitch has to go to Saudi Arabia.
Oh, right.
But man, he has to. It's kind of unsatisfying to write, because in order to be realistic, you have to understand that the surveillance there and the technology and the AI is so sophisticated that he's basically like, I can be on the ground for 48 hours.
Right.
Before for sure they're going to know I'm here, and I got to be gone, you know, when they find out. And it's kind of unsatisfying. It's one of the nice things about writing. If you write about Syria, you know, they're much less sophisticated, so you don't have that constant, oh, there's cameras. You know, China, the worst. I mean, cameras everywhere. So
with facial recognition and a massive force to respond to wherever you're at, you know, and really, it makes it hard to operate in places like that. And even Saudi Arabia, you're counting on what you think you know about their capability. Could be that today they loaded a new patch or, you know, bought some off-the-shelf software from somewhere, and it's like, oh yeah, it's now 2 hours. You know, that window shrinks.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah. The technology thing is crazy. I mean, just the phones and how that's changed. You know, when I deployed in 2004, there was wireless technology, but it wasn't like it is now, where it's literally everywhere, you know, and we were still on the very, very last end of, hey, we need a bank of payphones to go in and call home, you know, and that became obsolete within a fairly short amount of time. And so all of that has sped up everything, where you can be not only like, you can be geolocated with your phone that's connected to the internet on any camp in Afghanistan is recently, or as early as like 2009, probably, you know, where you're targetable and therefore a target, and oh my gosh, anything can happen, you know? And so you have these things like you can say, oh, it's a burner phone, but if you want to be realistic, you got to do way better than just say it's a burner phone.
Yeah, I mean, my last book, Enemy at the Gates, there was a big part of that was they were finding out that their burner phones, people could still locate them with them using the network. And it's difficult, but it can be done. And so, you're just never, and it's very different, you know, and if you want to write about it realistically, then you have to take those things into account. But I mean, how realistic do you necessarily have to be? I mean, you think about movies. I mean, they're huge car chases and you know, gunfights and all this stuff, and the police never, you know, the police would be interested in you if you did that, you know, running across the top of a train, whatever.
Oh yeah. And if you tried to have like the bullet car chase today in San Francisco, like it would be so much stuff in your way, you couldn't get up to 20 miles an hour. I mean,
no, exactly. So it's it's just a different world. And like I said, you know, I mean, just the technology, you know, for not just the changes in the political climate since Vince died, but the technology since he died creates an entirely new landscape.
Yeah. We're talking with Kyle Mills here. His latest book is called Oath of Loyalty. It's part of the Mitch Rapp series that was started by Vince Flynn. And so you can get that at the link that's right here on the thing. See that link right down there? That's it right there. Go to that link, or just look in the comments right now. It should be one of the first comments listed on there. And just in general, you should support the Break It Down Show. Go to breakitdownshow.com, hit the PayPal link, and just invent your own subscription. $5 a month, $10 a month. All that money goes right back into the show, and I'll put it to work on bringing you guys more great content. All right. So I wanted to ask you, when you have teammates and technology, especially since we were just talking about that, as it evolves, you need to bring in new experts, right? I mean, your guy might be able to keep up certain things, but all of a sudden there's like cyber command is now a thing, and it covers so much because there's, look, technology just explodes spherically, right? And so you can't be proficient at all of it.
No, and he has that with it through the CIA, and actually a character named Marcus Dumman that Vince created to keep up with all that stuff. But it's still, I mean, you can keep up with it, but it's almost at this point, it's that you just know it's there and that it's going to get you. There's no real countermeasure for a lot of it other than, move into throwing out all your electronics away and move into Alaska.
Right.
So it's definitely kind of weaving in and out and like quick hits and things like that, particularly if you're going to go up against a big power like China or Russia, who are becoming increasingly becoming the threats as the Islamic terrorism threat has kind of played out a little bit. So it's that those kinds of battles will be really interesting to see how they how they play out. Obviously, we're seeing that a little bit with Russia right now.
How does what's Mitch's mindset in terms of offensive capability in the same realm? I mean, like, he's a guy that wants to put his hands on things, right? And then there's some guy that's like, I made a plug-in, and then like he can do the job. Like going after Capone, you're like, we're going to get him on taxes. That's not what the cops want to do. They want to get him. Want to put cuffs on him and haul him away. How does he deal with that aspect of it, where like there's someone just like, oh, I have that information already, or whatever it is that you can do, because you can do offensively just as much as they can do at you.
Yeah, he hasn't really run into that yet. Like I said, he tends to move toward problems he can solve. Right. And I think Mitch is very, he's not, I think he comes off as very, very confident in his realm, maybe a little arrogant, but, he has the history to back it up.
Right.
When he says he can do something, it's because he can do something. But he's also very aware that outside of his narrow field of expertise, that he has to be really careful because he's not the expert. So, and you'll hear him say things like that this is what I do, but out here, there are people better equipped to do it,
Yeah.
So I think, it's like the old, line, what is it? The line from, Outlaw Josie Wales, a man's got to know his limitations. And that's how Mitch has stayed alive this long.
Yeah. As someone who's gone out of the wire a lot, every time you're rolling the dice, right? And it may not be because they're targeting Pete. It may just because you're in a military patrol. It may just be because they put out a bomb to get somebody in your person 15 and the bomb goes off. You just don't know. There is an element to luck and odds and continuing to be in that line of work. It's you use the gun. It's good. The gun's always going to try to get you.
Yeah. I mean, and Mitch would be the first to admit that he's been lucky, but being lucky is a great talent if you've got it.
Yeah.
Particularly in that business or in the military or whatever, it's not bad to be lucky. Yeah. You can admit that.
And when you go do dangerous things like he's doing, right, as he fights these things, you also accept that there's an amount of risk that you and your teams are going to, encounter, it to include death, right? And these things do happen. So when he's dealing with that, is it all still worth it to him? Is he thinking ahead like, I might have to stop doing this at some point. My left knee does kind of hurt more than it used to. All of these things that add up. And I know we're trying to age him slower, but these things are in the mind of an operator who's got 20 years of experience.
Yeah, he thinks about that more and more, actually, trying to retreat a little bit. Again, some of the problems, most of the threats to the United States that are serious are internal. They're us doing it to ourselves.
Right.
And that is very much one of those things that he says is outside of his area of expertise, that there are other people that can handle those things, not him. So he is thinking much more about that now. because even though Mitch doesn't age, he has to evolve. Otherwise, I think the series would get really stale. So, now he has the very serious girlfriend. He has a girl who's increasingly, his very much like his daughter that he has to think about. And it can't be all about him and the missions anymore. He has other responsibilities that he has to think about. And like you said, after 20 years, even without the even if you stop the years, there's still the mileage.
Yeah.
And if you look at his list, I have somewhere, his list of injuries is, pretty grave and pretty long.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I get a medical massage, once a week, and the VA covers that, because there's scar tissue and there's just, stuff's broken in there. Right. And so you got to imagine that Mitch has some kind of regimen. Like, you can't just keep trying to put 400 pounds off your chest in the gym. After a while, your shoulders are like, knock that off. Stop. Don't ever do that again. Those, I don't know, whatever it is, whatever the exercise, like one of the things, and this is for real. I started doing CrossFit a long time ago, like 15, 18 years ago, something like that. And I realized for what I was doing in my line of work, it was too explosive. It was too dangerous, because if you hurt your back or you pulled a muscle because you were over fatigued and doing something too long, that would make you combat ineffective. And you can't do that when you're deployed. Some people did, some people chose to, but I knew for me, I couldn't do that.
Yeah, injury resistance, very, very important. It's kind of an interesting thing, because it's something I feel every day. I was a very serious rock climber when I was younger, mountain bike racer, backcountry skier, and now I'm 56. And I'll tell you, I remember when I get out of bed every morning. Oh, I remember when I did that, or whatever.
Yeah.
My shoulders are destroyed from climbing for so long, and thank God I had the presence of mind pretty young to say, I'm going to start moving away from this, or else I'm not going to be able to move when I'm old. But, poor Mitch has been, stabbed, shot, blown up, thrown out of windows. Yeah. So that kind of thing adds up.
Yeah. So I used to rock climb, and I wasn't terribly good at it, but I could do it. I could do multi-pitch things, that kind of stuff. And if you do that, you are going to fall, and you are going to blast yourself into the side of a mountain.
Yeah, it's kind of inevitable. Yeah.
Yeah, and you only get so many of those. And then you also want to push yourself. So you're getting older, you're getting, you do when you're young, so you're still pretty limber and everything, but you are putting yourself on higher and higher, more challenging climbs, right? Like, I got to do this 514 thing, move and everything, this 514 climb. You're always trying to go higher. And that means that your falls are a lot more extreme. You're not just on belay, you're leading something. And does that same thing apply to Mitch? Does he feel like he's taking on greater and greater risk, or has he developed elegance in his approach?
I think he's comfortable in his realm.
Okay.
And understands the risks, and that, he might not come home. I think he goes out with that attitude all the time. It's a little harder now, with Claudia and Anna, though, he does have responsibilities that he didn't have before. I mean, before that, before his wife, the world would miss him, but it wasn't like there was anybody counting on him back home. Like, this was what he did.
Yeah.
And it was very much his entire life. But, he also reflected on the point that there was a point in his life that was kind of low, where he's living in this, like, studio, a crappy studio apartment surrounded by boxes around DC. And, that wasn't much of a life either.
Yeah. No, right. You don't have time or need to even have a picture on the wall. Yes. I understand this whole thing. So in Smokey and the Bandit, when they come back, they instantly get a new mission, and they're off to get clam chowder from Boston. At least that's how the movie closes, right? And there's another bet. Is that Mitch's reality, where he's like, I just got back, and then someone's like, here's your next dossier?
Well, it's funny. That's exactly the book I'm writing now. That's going to be the follow-up to Oath of Loyalty. Is very much that way, where he gets home, he's sitting there, he's working on his deck, like, this is great, I'm taking a nice break, and then the text comes in, and he's like, oh man, I didn't even, like, I've been home for 4 days.
Yeah.
So that's the nature of, I guess, the nature of being the character in a book that's one a year. That you've always got it. You're about to go out on a mission.
I forget, is Mitch a federal employee or is he a contractor?
He's a contractor
He's
now.
a
It kind of has gone back and forth, but
Yeah.
yeah, he's a contractor now.
So he must be stacking up a lot of cash, though. I mean, that's a good paying gig. You're constantly. I mean, he can charge almost anything he wants. Does he work for himself, or does he have someone negotiating contracts for him?
No, he basically works for the director of the CIA. They've known each other, well, since he was in his 20s
Right.
and when he actually worked for the agency. So, yeah, Mitch is actually, if you look at his history, he's put together quite a bit of money. Claudia is actually very rich because she was part of a contracting team that was
Mm.
very successful before her husband died. And Mitch's brother's a billionaire. So he doesn't spend a lot of time worrying about
Yeah,
money.
there's
And that's not why he does it. And, it never was.
right, right,
He's the guy who probably has a bunch of, uncashed paychecks lying around
right.
the house.
Yeah, yeah. That's funny. The pull of his girlfriend and stepdaughter, is that going to become greater over time? I mean, at some point you're like, hey man, how about somebody else? I'm taking a vacation, you know?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I really like her because I didn't like his wife because I thought she rode him too much.
Uh-huh.
It was kind of one of these things. She's like, well, you didn't do the laundry. And he's like, well, I was saving the United States from a nuclear holocaust. And she's
Right.
like, I don't want your excuses. Um, Whereas Claudia, because she's been involved in the business and is still involved in the business, she now works for Scott Coleman's company and does a bunch of logistics work for Mitch when he's out. Um, I think she's a good fit for him.
Yeah.
Like she understands what he does. She understands the risks. And the other great thing about Claudia is that's hard in books is you get very enamored with the idea of I'm going to give this operative a husband or a wife, and then you have a really hard time figuring out how to write him into it. They're like, oh, you can't. You're in the middle of an op. You're like, hey, just thought I'd call to say hello.
Hi, honey.
Yeah. So, I mean, like Vince at the end, it's funny. I was reading through the books and I'd read them, back and forth, right? I'd never read them straight through. And you could kind of tell. And there was a book that his wife was off, like at her in-laws the whole time. And that was sort of like to get her out of it. I thought, I think he's going to kill her here pretty soon. And I couldn't remember where it happened, but sure enough, like very shortly thereafter, you just don't know what to do with those characters. But with Claudia, she's part of what he's doing and what
Right.
Scott Coleman and his team, even more so what Scott Coleman and his team are doing. So you always have a reason for her to, be around and to have their relationship be something that, is a little more in depth because they can talk about these things because they both kind of done it.
I had Joe Pistone on the show. Everybody, he's the guy who was the actual Donnie Brasco in the movie that Johnny Depp played Donnie Brasco. That guy is actually called Joe Pistone. And I was asking him, because again, we have a lot of similarity in our jobs. We're not doing the same thing, but we have a lot of overlap. And the institution is always a threat to someone like Mitch. Like here's this outside element. Hey, who's controlling this guy? And that's an intrigue kind of part that you see a lot in the movies and everything. But it is a real thing. And at some point, your advocate retires, gets politically removed because they're in the wrong, whatever it is. And that exposes Mitch. How often does he have to deal with that and protect himself? Because I know for sure the American camp was equally, if not more dangerous to me. I would get fired and kicked off of camps all the time because I had a lot of bad news when I came back. I'm like, hey, what you guys think you're doing over here is not how it's actually going on. And that put me in peril. And I needed to have a commander or two or three willing to stick their neck out for me.
And that has not historically been too much of a problem with Mitch because he always had good rapport with the president. But the last book, Enemy at the Gates and Oath of Loyalty, which kind of closes out that arc, that story arc, he has a president who hates him and, the feelings are mutual. And so he does lose all of his political cover and in a way thinks that's it, because Irene, he always said if Irene went, that would be the day he went too. That would be the end of his career.
Yeah.
And those kinds of things start happening. And it's part of the thing that's interesting about this storyline that was Enemy at the Gates and now Oath of Loyalty, that he's having to think about what his next act is, because he's not old.
Right.
He used to be a triathlon, a championship triathlete, and he's thinking, well, maybe if I could get my knee fixed, I could go back into that and work with Scott Coleman's group a little bit, when it was something that interested me, and trying to figure out what his role would be, and if he can step away and let other people handle it, because I think that's a hard thing for somebody like Mitch to do.
It is. Yeah. Does he have any hobbies he would like to get into, but just doesn't have time?
Well, that's it. The athletics is the main one. He would like to, and you see him in this book trying to get back to, kind of a like low pro level where he's riding with these young pros, and he's thinking, boy, this is a lot harder than I remember. And, is this something I really want to do, or should I try to do something else? But, you get to a certain age, you get to a number of injuries, and you have to start thinking about that. I mean, it's like professional athletes.
Yeah.
Writing is great because I can do that. I can do this till I'm 80. I can do this drop dead on my, over my computer one day. But, people like Mitch or professional athletes they retire with a lot of life left. And you have to really think about that. I've seen it in the government. My father, it's up at the FBI, he retired when he was like 52 or something, because, if you carry a gun, he'd been in the FBI since his 20s, he got to retirement age. And then you had to think, wow, I could be retired longer than I worked. So he's struggling with that a little bit, and Mitch is struggling with that a little now.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you? What's up with you? You're working on the new book. Is this the next one in the same arc, or are you starting a new arc?
Well, no, because it's the arc. So that was a weird arc, because if The Enemy at the Gates was meant to be a 3-book arc, kind of that followed the fall of American democracy, that, people inside the American political system were trying to install, a president that would be more like Putin or Z or something, that kind of a permanent guy. And so that was going to be a 3-book arc. But then right in the middle of it, you had all the talk of, stolen elections and January 6th and all that. And it seemed a little too on the nose. So I rewrote that. And then Oath of Loyalty will be kind of the end of the arc of this really terrible president who's super autocratic and can't stand Mitch and wants him destroyed. And then I'll move so now that's kind of closed out to some extent, and then we'll move forward, with something different with the book I'm writing now.
Right. Do you think you'll stay in kind of a linear format with the book, or will you go back in time? And we talked about in-betweenquels before, like maybe there's some stuff in there, some things to mine and expand a story or something.
I think that'd be fun. I pitched that once because I don't know if people are aware, but Vince did that. He kind of wrote a bunch of books about Mitch in the current context, and then went back with American Assassin and told you his origin story. Then you had Kill Shot, which was kind of his first ops. And then I don't know why exactly I don't think anybody's ever been able to tell me, he went forward again. So clearly it was meant to be a trilogy, the American Assassin, Kill Shot, and then one more, because there were all these loose ends, like the love of his life and all this, that you have no idea what ever happened to that. So I once pitched going back and finishing that trilogy, but I don't know, nobody really seemed interested. They just kind of seemed like, keep it in the present time and go forward. So that's what I've done, and that's probably what I'll continue to do. Though I do have kind of in my mind what happened to Greta and like all these characters, and how Mitch went from being, kind of this enemy of Stan Hurley to, really, really close to him and stuff like that. So,
yeah.
One day, who knows?
I asked you last time, but I'll ask you again too. What are you working on for you? Or do you have time to do anything else, or is this enough for you and keeps you busy?
No, I'm shocked by, kind of my contemporaries' ability to write enormous numbers of good books. I can't do it. But I'll talk to them and they're like, well, I'm working on a Clancy book, but then I'm working on another one for my other series. I'm working on another one for my other series.
Yeah.
And you're like, you're writing 3 books at one time. And I can do one thing at a time.
Yeah.
So that's true my entire life, though. I think I think it drives my wife crazy. If I'm doing something, I can't think about anything. A meteor could land outside and I've never even noticed.
Yeah. Well, there is something to be said for single tasking, right? And just being focused. And we always talk about being present, but then you also have to multitask when you're present. Well, like those things don't really go together, right?
Yeah. And I mean, that society's really pushed us into this multitasking thing, and I'm trying to resist it.
Yeah. Yeah. I try to, and I'm going to try in September to specifically do it more and more, but I try to just put my phone down and not even have a phone. I'll still talk on the phone. I'll still do my emails when I have to, but I'm being less immediate about it and seeing how that feels. You'll appreciate this. My hometown, I go back quite a bit. I've got a lot of friends there and I love going back and I like to hang out. And so I was like, I'm going to be out on First Street, or a little main street to our town, and I'm going to get drinks with whoever's out there. And I'm just going to let it happen like it's 1988. Like I'm not going to pre-plan it. I'm just going to be out there, and people who come out will be there and we'll have a great time. And it did not go very well. I had one friend that I was going to meet no matter what. And I was like, I'm just going to find her because the First Street isn't very big. And I'm just going to go hang out with her. And then we'll pick up people along the way. That did not work at all. I left my phone behind. I couldn't even get to it. I locked my friend's door and I left the house. And, the phone is such an important thing. But I'm going to do my best in September just to put it down. And I'm going to try to do a specific hour each day and then add another hour until like the end of the month. I'm barely even touching my phone.
It's hard to remember what it was like beforehand. I mean, I think about my first book. Somebody was asking me about it, like research. You talk about research, and now you're talking about the internet and stuff. And I just remember, oh my God, how did I figure out about this poison? I was like, the 1-800 phone book. I called the company that made it and was like told them what I was doing. And they're like, oh no, we know, we'll send you to that department or whatever. And I mean, going on the microfiche at the library and all that stuff. And I have to say, I check out a fair amount because I do a lot of like trail running and stuff in Wyoming, and there's no signal. So I'm lucky that way, but I'm addicted to the internet. The idea, I'm an information junkie.
Yeah.
And being able to know everything in the world in 30 seconds, to me, it's the golden age. Because I come up with this, it's like, is a platypus venomous? And I can't think of anything else, and I have to look it up.
Yeah.
But it's stupid stuff like that, but I do it all day.
Yeah. But microfiche has the same thing, right? Or microfilm, depending on what platform you're using, and you're going through and you're like, what's this? And you have to read this old story, and I know you must remember, like you look through and you see an old ad and you're like, look at this old ad, and it's all just so fascinating to go through and look at. So I guess that's always been there. It's just, it's more, I don't know, omnipotent, the knowledge machine. It just knows so much more than you could possibly ever know.
And it's a fire hose, it's so, you don't have to go drive down to the, it's instant gratification. You have to go anywhere, do anything, or get old magazines. And I mean, just settings, back when I was younger, I had a job. I couldn't travel to the places that I was writing about. So you have to go get old travel magazines and look at the pictures and the descriptions. You didn't have, now with Google Maps, I know exactly how long it would take him to run from this street to this street in Istanbul. And I think, it's great. It is great because it's improved the accuracy of books. It's made it a lot easier to write them. But it is funny to think that I've written books where people, are madly trying to sprint to a payphone, to call in help.
I could just see, like, Mitch is running, somewhere adjacent to the Champs-Élysées, and he's running along, and his wearable watch is like, bling, bling, email, bling, bling, email. And he's
yeah, totally. And it's his heart rate monitor.
Yeah.
You're out of zone.
Yeah.
It's like
you only had 2 hours of sleep last night and it was restless. I'm going to have to deal with these things.
Exactly.
Oh, it's so funny.
And he thinks about that a lot. In fact, I just wrote a chapter where he's thinking he's walking through, this Middle Eastern country. It's at night. He's alone and it's silent. And he remembers, this is kind of where I grew up. And there's a certain, the smell of the dust and everything. There's a certain thing I like about it. It's just so different than what I experience at home.
Yeah. Does Mitch have a counterpart who's his equal anywhere in his universe at all, whether he's a Russian dude or some dude who works another part of the world from the American perspective?
He did. And I created this character. This isn't one of Vince's. And I created it. And then I didn't know if I should. And I actually called Vince's editor and his agent. I'm like, I'm thinking about doing this. Do you think it's okay? And they said, yes. It's a guy named Grisha Azarov. And he was pretty much Mitch's equal. Almost killed Scott Coleman, and ended up kind of this big showdown on like an oil rig in Saudi Arabia between him and Mitch. And Mitch won, but I mean, at the end of it, his hair was literally on fire and he was falling off the rig and had to put his hair out in the sand. And he said, I would really rather not ever meet that guy. He was worse off and he figured he was going to die of it. And that character came back a couple of times, more as an ally, but then retired. So now, in fact, he's got a little tiny part in this book and at the Loyalty where he calls Mitch. But Mitch is thinking last he heard, he'd gained 30 pounds and smokes a lot of weed and surfs with his girlfriend. So that was the last of Mitch's sort of equals in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess you can always conjure a new one up, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah, sure. It was interesting because, Mitch had never faced that. If you think about the way life has worked for Mitch, he's always by far the best, guy in the room. And to have somebody and he sees him tear through Scott Coleman like he's not even there. And Scott Coleman's, one of the top SEALs, in kind of in history. And it's, it's a completely different thing when you have somebody out there gunning for you.
Yeah, cool. Hey, I don't want to take all your time, but I know we're just past an hour here. So anything in closing before I wrap this up?
No, I hope people like the book. The initial reviews of it, people seem to really enjoy it. And I know everybody was wanting me to close out that arc. And some people thought I had left too many things in the air with Enemy at the Gates. But a lot of it had to do with the fact that all of a sudden in the book, the arc I was writing, wasn't going to work anymore.
Right.
Right. That's the danger you have as a thriller writer. You come up with these scenarios that feel like really it's just around the corner, and then it takes a year to write it and you find out, wow, that really was just around the corner. Oops. So I hope people enjoy seeing that arc closed out. I know a lot of people have been waiting for a year to see it happen.
Okay, cool. Stand by for 1 second.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly.